All right, welcome everybody. I think I'm going to get things going here. Thank you for joining on tonight. My name is Nick Lapoma, the owner of Curve Breakers Test Prep. And tonight I'm going to be talking about the PSAT and the scores and how to analyze them and what to do to prepare for the future digital SAT. So once again, I know I'm seeing a lot of similar names from my last webinar. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to type those in the chat. There is a Q&A button, should be on the bottom. So feel free to throw those in there at any point in time. I'll answer those in real time. And then also, I'm thinking that just based on the length of my presentation, that if anyone was on the last one, I think that one went about an hour, a little bit over an hour. So this one probably should be a little bit shorter than that, just so you know. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. And once again, feel free to throw out any questions at any point in time. I'm always happy to answer. So let me just share my presentation here. Okay. So, as you probably know, the PSAT scores were released this month, and that's very exciting for students. I was particularly excited just to see what the scores looked like. As some of you may know, we do have a digital SAT practice test app that students can use to prepare for the test, get their score and see how they do. And I was curious to see how the PSAT scores aligned with what we have, and I was very pleased to see that the student scores were extremely similar to what I expected them to be. I was lucky enough to have one of my students score a perfect score on the PSAT, so hats off to that student, which was amazing. And I think overall it was a success. I think I've spoken to a lot of different people at schools, and I'm sure parents may have this question. With the administration of the test, last month, a few weeks ago, actually, I was at the New York State School Counselors Association meeting in Albany, and I met countless school counselors that gave me feedback on their experience administering the PSAT. Most of them said it went very well. There were a few technical issues and glitches and whatnot, but I think overall it was a positive experience. And I think the students overall greatly enjoy, and I use the term enjoy, with a grain of salt, of course, greatly enjoyed the digital SAT when comparing it to either the ACT or the paper SAT, for the main reason being that it's much shorter. So for anyone that doesn't know, the digital SAT is 2 hours and 14 minutes. The old SAT and the ACT were about 3 hours long. I'm going to go over this as well later, but there's also significantly fewer questions in the digital SAT. Anyone with any questions about how this all works, I'm happy to answer that. But I think the feedback was positive. So just wanted to go over that first. Won't waste too much time about myself. I mean, most of you probably know who I am, but my company Curve Breakers is extremely committed to working with students, families, schools, and helping students do better on tests like the SAT and the ACT and the PSAT. And we greatly enjoy doing that. It's a great passion of mine, and I love providing this kind of information because that's what I was lacking when I was going through the process. So once again, if there's any questions at any point in time, feel free to jump in. So what is the point of the PSAT? Well, there's really two main functions for the PSAT. Number one is it's a practice version of the SAT for students to take so they can acclimate themselves to the actual SAT, see what it's like, do problems, get a score, get a gauge on where they stand, what their score range is, and see, what they need to do to improve and get into the college that they want. The other thing that it's used for is the National Merit Scholarship Qualification Test. That's what NMSQT stands for. So basically, if you score over a certain threshold, depending on your state, based on a different calculation, which I'll go over the calculation, not the calculation of your actual PSAT score, not the score at a 1520. And for anyone that doesn't know, the PSAT is out of 1520, whereas the SAT is out of 1600. Why do they do that? I'll also explain that later. But basically, they just want to make it different than the SAT and build in a little bit of an increase for some students, so that your score can kind of go up, not down. But the other big function is it's a qualification test, and there's a different qualification metric that they calculate, called an index score. And that index score is used to see if you qualify for this certain scholarship. In order to qualify, you have to score extremely highly, which I will go over that, but it's something that some students every year at Curve Breakers do receive. I know at least one student's getting it because that student got a perfect score, which is amazing. But I think it's a $5,000 scholarship, something in that range, which is amazing. I mean, everyone wants $5,000. I think there's also $2,500 scholarships they give out for other students, but that's another use, and it's an accolade, right? So if you get this, it looks good. I wouldn't fixate too much on it for anyone who has a 10th grader, like, oh, do I need to really prepare for the PSAT to get the national merit? I mean, yeah, it's great. It's an amazing thing to get. And hats off to any student that does get it. But, just because you don't get it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to get into a top-notch school. So I just wanted to throw that out there. A lot of people think that, it's like a prerequisite to getting into a lot of the top schools, but it's definitely not. So those are the two main uses: practice and scholarship. So here is the calculation for the National Merit Scholarship qualification. Anyone has any questions about this, I'm happy to answer those after, or, privately, but basically the score is calculated by using the section scores. So you take your reading and writing score, you multiply that by 2, you add it to your math score, and you divide by 10. So, so the maximum is 228, and in New York, to get the actual scholarship, you can see this is an example of what the index score looks like. They give it to you on the page. In order to get this accolade, you actually need to score over 220. It's probably going to be like 222 is usually what it is, which is near perfect. It's out of 228, so 222 is near perfect. So basically, in order to get this scholarship, you need to score near perfect. In other states, it's lower. So it's a state-by-state thing. You compare, you compare yourself to other students in your state, right? So not to like disparage any other states, but if you're in a state that has a lower score, like say like Mississippi or something like that, typically those states will be more like 210 will get you the scholarship. So it's not a national thing, even though it is a national scholarship. It's a state-by-state thing. So if you just look at this score, if you're looking at your report and it's a very high, like in the 220 range, you could get an accolade. You can get a scholarship. If it's like this 139, that it just basically doesn't count for anything, and colleges won't see it. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I didn't do well on the PSAT. Will colleges, give me a demerit or not want me because of this? That's absolutely not true. So they'll never see that, and it's something you don't have to worry about. So here is your PSAT score report, right? So like I said earlier, the maximum is 1520. You have the minimum. Hopefully, we're not nearing that. And you have the two separate scores. So you have the reading and writing score, and you have the math score. That's important to evaluate your skills, right? So you can look at those and say, okay, I need more work on English. I need more work on math. There's also little data points they give you. I would say they're not hugely helpful. They tell you like the percentage you got correct in certain areas of math and certain areas of English. They're not hugely helpful. I mean, they give you a little bar graph. It's somewhat helpful, but once again, you probably want to do a more detailed diagnostic. So if you're looking at your PSAT score, you're wondering, okay, what do I need to do to improve? That's something where I can look at it. Of course, I'm happy to look at it for anybody and give just some general advice. At the same time, what I would recommend students do is do a more comprehensive digital SAT practice test. We do give that as a service at Curve Breakers. We do it at a lot of schools. We do it privately at our office, and you can do it online, right? The test is digital, so you can do this online, and you can get a more thorough breakdown of your score. So that is, I would say, one of the drawbacks of the PSAT. Another huge drawback is you're not really able to review your test. So I think students find that to be frustrating. A lot of students will want to review it, go over it with a tutor, go over it on their own, just take a look at how they did, review some of the questions. That's one of my big complaints about the new digital SAT is there's going to be fewer practice questions floating around than there were previously. As some of you may know, with the old paper SAT, in months like March, you can pay an extra $25 and something to that effect and access your questions, right? And you can take those questions and review them. And you can go over them with the tutor, you can go over them in a class, you can go over them on your own, and you can just at least see how you did, like look at the questions and, learn something from it, right? So now with that not being possible, that's going to make preparing for the test a little bit harder, but at least students have the experience of sitting there and using the digital Blue Book platform. And that's why students, are encouraged to do the PSAT, because it helps them navigate the platform. And I think more importantly than ever, it shows them what the test is like, teaches them how to use the features, gives you access to the calculator. It's called the Desmos calculator, gives you access to a bunch of other stuff, the timer and the little marking tools that they have. So overall, a positive experience for students that did take it. If you did get this kind of score, 1120, I think that's, it's a solid score. You can see this in the 82nd percentile, and that means that you scored better than 82% of students in the nation. Doesn't sound like a huge score, but for the PSAT, it's the starting point and the lowest point, I would say, for most students. So the scores are a little bit lower than they would be maybe for the SAT, right? So it gives you a good point to build on, and something to improve on. So here's a little bit more information. So you can see, you have your test scores, you have your total score, your percentile. You can see 960, that's more of the average score, which is nice to show here. You can see also your percentiles in the different sections. So if you look very closely, it's a little bit small, but you can see for this student on the English portion, 430 is in the 31st percentile, but 530 is in the 69th percentile for math. So you can see this student did significantly better on math than English, and that may be just useful for preparing for the test. Like, okay, I need to spend a lot more time on the English piece. And it also shows like readiness things, right? So, it shows a green check mark under the math that you are on track to be ready for college. And that score on the English part, they're saying is almost on track. What this also does is it also gives you recommendations. So what the PSAT report, if you download it from College Board, will tell you is it gives you like recommended career paths and salary ranges and things like that. I wouldn't put too much into that. I'm not sure how they are determining that. I think it's like based on your score and like some interest that you check off, but that's what they're doing. And really to understand what a lot of this is about, one of the biggest, line items on College Board's balance sheet is income that they get from selling your information, right? So they're collecting a massive amount of data on students. They're probably selling it to colleges so that they can market to you based on your score, based on your interests, so on and so forth. So really a data company, right? They're providing this data. They're using this data for financial gain and for their own purposes, right? So it shows you the benchmarks and where you fall. You can see the little yellow part is that almost ready. The red is something where you need to be a little bit more concerned about, in their opinion, and the green is you're in a good range. So how does this translate to an SAT score? So the way that this is designed is it's supposed to give you an approximation of your SAT score. So they're using something called a common score scale, which means that you would likely score the same. What I've noticed is without studying, students do slightly better on the SAT. There's some more points to gain. Also, you have more experience, right? You took the PSAT, you got that experience. Maybe you learned something from it. Oh, I ran out of time. Maybe you move more quickly. I didn't do as well in English. Maybe I need to focus more. Maybe you do some studying. Obviously, studying is how you really improve your score, but it's designed to basically be the same. So it's a little bit of a fallacy to think that a student who say got 1200 on the PSAT is going to go into the SAT and get a 1300. That's probably not going to happen, unfortunately. Now, if they study, that definitely will happen, right? Or not definitely, but it's very possible the student do even better than that, right? If you prepare vigorously for the test, you're going to score better, right? So that's good, right? So you can improve your score. But at the same time, if you just took the PSAT in November and you took the next SAT without studying, the idea is that your score would be very similar, right? So I've found it's usually slightly better. That's just my personal anecdotal experience, but it's designed to be the same. So you can see here the example. If you scored a 1200 on the PSAT, you're likely to score a 1200 on the SAT. So let's talk a little bit about what else the PSAT score brings for you. So you get access to their app called Big Future, which, like I said earlier, is a lot of data collection. They're basically guiding you on an academic journey and a future profession. So it has suggested careers. You could see it helps you plan and pay for college. Like there's articles that you can read. You know, it's very small, but I could read it. It says key steps to take in November for 10th graders. What is a Pell Grant? So things about like getting scholarships and grants, snapshot of growing careers in your state. So it actually, like I said, state by state tells you popular careers, things that you can, that you could possibly do with your life as a student. I think that's definitely somewhat helpful. Like students definitely should start thinking about that. Taking the PSAT is a good, good time to start that process, right? Like most of the students take the PSAT, they start studying, they take their SAT in March. Maybe they take it in May if they're not doing a lot of APs, and then they'll probably take it maybe again in June. Some students will take it again after that. Some students will hopefully be done, right? They'll be happy with their score and move on to their college applications and other parts of the process. So it's a good starting point, and I would say aptly timed. I think for anyone that is interested in scoring very, very highly on the SAT or improving their score a lot, if you are in 11th grade or you have an 11th grader, you probably want to get started as soon as possible, right? Because the March SAT is coming up very quickly. It'll be here much faster than you expect. Once you go through the holiday season, New Year's, hit January, then the test is usually in early March. So it's not that much time, right? So it really creeps up. So you do want to get on that. If you have a 10th grader, or you're planning in advance, or you are a 10th grader, then and you really want to do well, you might want to consider starting to prepare, or just like looking at your options a little bit earlier than that. And one thing I will say is, and it's something that part of what I try to provide for clients, students, anybody that seeks my advice, is something individualized. And that's what I do. That's what we do here, is we look at each person, each school, each family individually and say, what is the best for them, right? So if you came to me and said, Nick, I took a 10th grade PSAT, I got 1,000, I want to go to Harvard, what should I do? Well, my answer would be probably want to start studying earlier than someone who, say, got a 1,200 and says, I want to go to a school that requires a 1,250, right? Because that student is in a very good position, whereas the first student is going to need a huge amount of work, right? So I would encourage all of you to start having those conversations. Students, start thinking about it. Parents, start thinking about it and say, where do we want to end up? What do we want to do? And this is part of the process. Another thing you can do is, of course, take a diagnostic ACT. We provide that service as well. And you could take, if you don't want to wait for the PSAT, or you want to try the full SAT, you can do a diagnostic SAT. You also can do one on the Blue Book app. So in the same app that you use to actually take the test, they have 4 practice tests. I took one of them. It's very helpful to go through the test, and it gives you a score at the end. What it doesn't give you is a very detailed breakdown, and we do give that. So if you do want that detailed breakdown, that's something that we can do for you. But at the same time, each person is different, each family is different, each student is different, and my main aim is to guide everyone in the right direction for them. So that's a good conversation to start with the students. College Board is really aiming to use this app as an informational hub. They want to use the data for various purposes. Like I said, career readiness, they're probably selling it. They also have links to Khan Academy, which I highly encourage students to leverage. Khan Academy is a study resource that it's really a charity that teamed up with College Board, and they make a lot of the test preparation. They make high school content. You can study geometry on there. You can study grammar rules. You can study for the SAT. You can study a lot of things. I believe they have almost all high school subjects at this point, which is great, and it's free. So I highly encourage people to use that. Is that a comprehensive preparation for something like the SAT? Probably not for most students, but it's a great starting place, and it's something that I highly encourage students to use. But also, I think the other benefit of using something like that is it does have practice questions, and it does have explanations. Now, since they've teamed up with College Board, you have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt that, it's not a prep company that's getting paid to give you the exact best right information, right? I don't think they're giving out wrong information, but I don't think they're really endeavoring to be as detail oriented as someone like myself would be, right? So it's a great way for students to prep on their own. It's a great free resource, but like I said, not probably the end all be all of your preparation. All right, so to maximize your preparation, so okay, we have our score, we understand how the system works. You would want to consider taking more diagnostic tests, right? So say I have my PSAT score and I want to start to prepare. What do I do? So you can use a Blue Book app, you take a diagnostic test there. Like I said, you can use our digital SAT platform. You take diagnostic tests there, gives you a little bit more feedback, a little more information, gives you follow-up lessons. So there's clickable links to follow-up questions and follow-up lessons that are geared towards your mistakes, right? Say you didn't like the digital SAT, you don't like doing a test on the computer, or you didn't like the nature of the test, or you don't like having so much math on the test, right? That's a great reason to look at the ACT, right? So the ACT is a great alternative for a lot of students. Now, what I would say is for any of the students on here, or parents thinking about this, my experience now over the past few months in giving digital SAT and ACT practice tests and talking to students and parents, I mean, let's all ask ourselves this question. Would you rather do a 2 hour and 15-minute standardized test, or would you rather do a 3 hour standardized test, right? So most students are liking the digital SAT better than the ACT. Now, that doesn't mean that they score better on it, right? So I've had a lot of students come in that have scored better on the ACT and said, of course, they like the SAT better, main reason being that it's shorter. The other thing that the SAT is doing, and something that I can explain further if anyone has any questions about it, how did they shorten the test? They did it with adaptive testing. So basically you take module 1, it grades module 1. So say math, right? You do the first set of 22 questions, it grades those, and then it feeds you either an easier or a harder set for the next 22 questions, depending on your performance, right? So a lot of students taking the PSAT meetings I've done at schools, and it's talking to students, wow, the PSAT seems so easy, and that may have been the case. It also may have been that the student was fed the easier module 2, and that's why they felt the test was easy. Now, if you haven't, kind of been on my last webinar, you may not know that the reason that you get the easier module 2 is that you didn't do as well on the first part. So the end result is that your score is going to be lower. So it sounds weird, right? Like, I did better, so I get harder questions. Well, yes, your score is also going to be much higher. So if you move on to the easier module, you're probably going to be below 600. If you move on to the harder module, you're probably going to be at around 600 or over 600. So if you want to get over 600 on one of the sections of the test, you have to move on to that harder module. So it's interesting psychology, interesting marketing, right? So if you think about it, they're making it more of a pleasurable experience for the students that are actually doing not as well, right? So that's making the students not hate the SAT. And there's a good part about this too. It's like, if you're struggling a little bit with a test, why would you want to do a huge set of difficult questions and get majority of them wrong? Like that wouldn't be appropriate for the student, and it's not a good feeling, right? So I think that's good. Like, it makes the students feel better about the test. But at the same time, I think students and parents have to understand that that has a major impact on the student score, right? So a lot of students liked the SAT because it was easy, but also didn't do as well as they would have liked. So it's like kind of conflicting, So long story short, if you didn't do as well as you would have liked on the PSAT, you definitely should try the ACT. And that leads into the next point, is you want to kind of play to your strengths, right? So one big difference between the two tests is that the SAT is half math, right? So you have English and math as the 2 sections. On the ACT, there's 4 sections, and only one of them is math. So on the ACT, you have 25% math, whereas in the SAT, you have 50% math. So if you're a great math student, you love math, probably gonna like the SAT, right? If you're not a great math student, or you just don't like math, it's not your favorite subject, and kind of, don't want to deal with that as much, then the ACT becomes an incredible alternative for those students, because then those students can do a test with less math and probably do better on that test, right? So That's something to consider. So what do we do with this, right? Let's use as a baseline, right? So we have our baseline, we took the PSAT, we have our score, right? Like I said earlier, it gives you an idea of how far you are from your goal score and can also guide you towards how much preparation you need to do to get there. It also may help you determine if you even want to do the SAT. So like I said earlier, you don't like your score, take a practice ACT, you do like that score or it's better, then that is a good feeling, right? I have something that I can do better on. So sometimes students feel that their PSAT score is not a good indication of their ability, right? Like, say I'm a student and I have a 97 average in school and I didn't do as well as I would have liked on the SAT. That can, kind of dictate what they should do with the process. Maybe that student should try the ACT. Maybe they just need to really start studying. Maybe they just didn't try that hard on the PSAT. That's very common, right? I think it's pretty well known that the test doesn't matter for that much for 99.9% of students. It's just a practice. So sometimes the effort level maybe isn't as high as it should be or would be on like a real test, right? So if you feel like that's the case, or you feel like, okay, like student says, I just wasn't into it that much, or I don't know, I was thrown off, or kids in my school weren't taking it seriously, or whatever the case may be, that's a great reason to try to take another digital SAT. And of course, like I said earlier, we can provide that. So, once again, numbers don't dictate who you are as a person. We could think to some of the most successful and, wealthiest people on earth, dropped out of college. Not that I'm saying that that's a good thing, but, your SAT score isn't, totally tied to the rest of your life. It may be tied to getting into certain colleges, but at the same time, if you don't do well on the PSAT, it doesn't mean you're a bad person or that you're not going to be successful, right? So you don't want to just fixate on this too much, but at the same time, if it's not what you want, you do want to go to certain schools, then you really do need to prepare for the test and study vigorously to get your score up, which, I think to make another point, I've seen students improve wildly from their PSAT score, especially, right? Because it's usually their first foray into taking these kind of tests, especially with this generation of students that, a lot of tests were canceled, maybe they didn't take as many regents, or they're just not as, as geared towards testing because of what's happened, the pandemics and so on and so forth. It's a new thing for them, right? So it's very likely that a student could be extremely thrown off by taking their first standardized. For some students, it's their first standardized test, or one of their first, right? So those students can probably improve a lot, right? Just getting themselves more acclimated to standardized testing and, and so on and so forth. So I would not make it into a source of pain or to feel discouraged about it. So a little bit more about the differences between the SAT and the ACT. There's a lot of common things, but there's also a lot of differences, right? So the pace, right? The pace is the biggest difference, in my opinion. The ACT, much faster paced exam. If you struggle with time constraints, finishing things within time, then you may not like the ACT, right? You have a lot to do in a very short period of time. The SAT is basically going with a new philosophy, which is basically that they want the time element almost entirely removed from the test. So it is timed, of course, but a large majority of students will not struggle with the time on the digital SAT, and it's designed like that on purpose. They don't want students to have the pain of not finishing because it's very painful, right? It's that extremely damaging to your score to not finish a standardized test, like to leave the last 10 questions like blank or to put just B or something like that. It really kills your score on a standardized test. At the same time, obviously, if a student was in that boat, if you were able to work on your time management and you were able to finish, your score is going to go up a lot, right? So a huge amount, in fact. So that's a big decision maker for students. And the best way to figure that out for yourself is to just try the ACT, right? If you try it and you don't finish all the sections and you feel that it's way too rushed, then I would recommend not taking the ACT, but like I said, the SAT is kind of moving away from that timed nature to the best of their ability without making the test untimed, right? There's also some differences in the math section. So it's a little bit of a content difference. So the SAT is geared more towards algebra 2, and the ACT has a much larger quantity of geometry and trigonometry questions. So, that's for some students a minor thing, but for other students, it's kind of a major thing. There's a lot of students out there that really don't like geometry at all. So that's an instance where, you may want to switch SAT or ACT. The ACT also has a science section. So I want to clarify that a little bit. The science part of the ACT is really more of a reading and interpretation section, right? You're interpreting passages about science, you're interpreting graphs, you're interpreting diagrams, right? You don't have to go study biology, chemistry, physics. Like that's not what the section is about, right? So a lot of students look at the ACT like, oh, I don't like science, I don't want to do the ACT. I've had some of those students do the best on the science, like that's their best section, right? Because they're really good at reading, right? So I would encourage students to not put too much weight in like, I don't like science and I don't want to do the ACT, right? But I think overall, and this is an interesting point, the SAT is a little bit more analytical, which makes it a little bit challenging for students. Like it's more of a test where you have to think things through. Also, like I said earlier, you're not really being strictly timed, and the questions are very quirky. Everyone knows like SAT questions, SAT math, vocabulary, so on and so forth. So it's a little bit on the trickier side, whereas the ACT is a little bit more straightforward. So like question to question, most students would find the ACT easier. Say you had all day to do either test. There's no time element. You could just do it at your own leisure. Most students would say the ACT is the easier of the two. You have to memorize more formulas, you have to memorize more rules. That's kind of like something that's more helpful on the ACT. So for students that like to be a little bit more straightforward and they like moving quickly through things, then the ACT could be a great fit. This is a little diagram that kind of shows differences. You can see the big difference in question number and time, right? So on the left bottom in the light blue is the old paper SAT, on the top in yellow is the ACT, and on the bottom right is the digital SAT. So you could see for the ACT, you have 215 questions to do in about 3 hours, right? Now for the digital SAT, you have 98 questions to do in 2 hours and 14 minutes. So you could see just from a time per question perspective, you have significantly more time per question on the digital SAT. And, like I said earlier, if you ask a student, like, would you rather do 215 questions in 3 hours or 98 questions in 2 hours and 14 minutes? I don't really need to, I think we all know the answer to that, right? So I think we'd all have the same answer. But at the same time, we have to do what's best for each individual student. And a lot of times that involves taking the ACT. We also have the calculator, which is available in all sections, all math sections of the new digital SAT, whereas in the old paper and pencil SAT, you did not get a calculator for section 3, which was a main source of pain. To kind of just summarize why they did all this and what they did, College Board, with making the new digital SAT, they took the main complaints that everyone had, myself included, right? People that prep students for tests, and said, what do we all dislike about the paper SAT, right? It's too long, too many questions. We don't like the no calculator part. It's too many long reading passages that are not relevant to students. Takes too long to get the scores back, so on and so forth. And they fixed all that, right? They shortened the test, they shortened the number of questions, they shortened the passages, they made it more relevant to students. They gave you an embedded calculator. There's a calculator plugin you can actually click and access a free calculator while you're doing the test. You have to have your own calculator, and a lot of other benefits, right? So they really did fix a lot of things with the test. I think the feedback, like I said, going to the school counselor conference, talking to students, talking to parents, I think the new SAT, and from my own personal experience of sitting down and taking it, it is much better than the old SAT. So that's a good thing, right? It's much less painful to take and to do. So I wanted to show you guys a little bit what the questions look like. So you could see these kind of questions, instead of the long passages, and this is still, pretty lengthy to read through, but you have a question 7 here on the left, you have a short paragraph, and then which choice best states the main purpose of the text. So you have to read this from main point, main purpose. The next one is the same question, except now we have a poem, right? So poems were not on the paper SAT, and very, very, very infrequently would ever be on the ACT. So now we have poems, which students are already kind of complaining about that a little bit, but because we're already tutoring students for the digital SAT. So I have a lot of experience with that already, feedback from students. But that's a little snapshot. And then this one on the right is a totally new question type, which says, and you can see here, this is the question stem. So that's what you want to kind of focus on. The student wants to present a study and its findings. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes? So like note taking, right? That's like something that's more relevant to students. So I think students, it's a little bit of a difficult question. Once you get the hang of it, these are actually pretty easy, but it's a new style of question that is designed to be geared more towards skills that students would actually need, right? So making the test a little bit more relevant. Here's a few more. You have another main idea with a poem. And then we have question 17, which choice most logically completes the text? So you have to basically finish the sentence. And then number 20 on the right, which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English? So now that's like a grammar related question, right? So you have different combinations of commas and conjunctions, right? So you have you have out, but, out, comma, but, out, and then out, comma, right? So we have to determine which one of those is grammatically correct in the sentence. So that goes into analyzing sentence structure. Do I have an independent clause? Do I have a dependent clause? And that's how you determine the answer to that. So similar style of question that they used to have, just without the long-winded passages, right? So instead of answering a number of questions on one passage, you're answering one question individually. So say I don't get question number 20, or I don't get one of these main idea questions, like say number 10, that's not a big deal, right? That's just one question. Whereas in the old SAT and on the ACT, there's an entire passage, right? So if I don't understand the main idea of the passage, I get that question wrong, and then I probably get other questions wrong because I'm not grasping the passage, and there's 10 questions connected to that passage. So students tend to like this better, right? Because one question, one passage doesn't dictate how you're going to do on 10 other questions. So that's another positive change for the PSAT and the SAT. And here's a few examples of math questions. So you can see you have inequalities, these are word problems, right? So you're just creating an inequality. Then we have an angle related question. So there's some geometry. And then number 21 is a circle formula related question. Every student, the students on here are parents advising their students, you have to know the circle formula for the SAT. You also should know it for the ACT. It doesn't come up as often. This is like the kind of knowledge that people that engage in preparing students for these tests know. Every single paper SAT has a circle formula question. Most students don't know the circle formula, which is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared. Students have to memorize that formula and know how to use it. So I'm just showing that as an example. And this is where like the strategizing and understanding the test comes into play. If you're helping students prepare for that in our classes that we do in our office and at schools, and when I'm tutoring students and everyone else here at Curve Breakers is tutoring students in our online courses and in person and stuff like that, that's something that we need to go over, right? So that's an important piece of the SAT for the math part. And here's a few more questions. So we have a linear function, which you can use some great strategies here, plugging the answer choices back in. You have a calculator for the digital SAT, right? So you could just plug these back in. The X value, XY points, right? You could just plug those back in. You also could graph these things on the Desmos calculator, right? So that's amazing. We have a geometry question for number 13 that tests you on rules of angles, parallel lines. And then we have, a percent increase question for number 24. So these are like just commonly tested things. I just wanted to point out concepts, just examples of things that you definitely should know for the test, and just what the questions look like. They're just a little bit different than they were before. But I will say, the one thing I will say is that the math is largely the same. And that is, I would say, good. But there's also a bad part of that. I think what I've heard from clients and from people is that a lot of students are throwing and tutors and companies are throwing around the idea that the old tests can be used to prepare for the new test. I would run away from that as fast as humanly possible. That's like just kind of a lazy approach. We have to use new tests, new materials based on the new test. It is different. There's different features, different tools, new calculator, so on and so forth. So we don't want to use anything old. That's why we had to redo our book, redo all of our materials, redo all of our courses, which is a huge time that needs to be spent on our part, but obviously we're happy to do it because that's what's going to be most beneficial to the students. So we've redone all this already. Our new book is being published hopefully by early next month. I have the thing pretty much done. We just got to get it pushed through. And the new courses are already all designed. So all the courses we're doing from now on will be solely based on content from the new digital SAT. And I would encourage all of you, anyone looking into preparing for the test or weighing your options, to only focus on things that are based off of the new test. So here's some frequently asked questions. And if anyone does have any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat. I'm happy to answer. Now would probably be a good time for that as we get a little bit towards the end of this. Do colleges prefer one exam over the other? That's a common question, and it's a difficult one to answer. The answer is no, right? The reason that it's difficult is, I'm from New York, right? I'm assuming that a lot of you are also from New York. Some maybe not, right? But if you grew up in New York, people typically just took the SAT. Like that was what was focused on. Now, on the flip side, if you grew up in Colorado or Louisiana, it's going to be the reverse. The students there are, in Louisiana, for example, are mandated to take the ACT as a high school graduation requirement, right? So if you were from Louisiana, you would be like only considering the ACT and not the SAT. So that's where the idea that like colleges prefer one or the other kind of comes into play. But it's not really true, right? So you just want to do what's best for you, and use your PSAT score to evaluate how you did on the SAT, and take a diagnostic ACT and see which one is better for you. So a little bit about super scoring. So super scoring is the concept that if you take two SATs, you can take the better of the math and English section. So say you did better on math on one test and better on English on the other test, and you can crunch those together into what's called a super score. Colleges will accept that. I guess another big question that's come up is, are colleges going to super score the old SAT, the paper SAT, with the new digital SAT? They're saying that they are. That's what the College Board is saying they will allow, and that's going to be accepted. That's up to each college to make that determination on their own. But my experience with the last time this happened 8 years ago was that they will accept that, because it just falls in a weird time, right? We're transitioning in December. So a lot of kids in 11th grade are already still trying to take the paper test. Like many students may be taking their last, try at it on Saturday. So that is something that has come up, right? Like what do I do if I need to take the new test, right? I think there's actually some creative things that can be done with that. If students tend to do better in the math part, then they may do well in the old SAT in the math, and then the new English format may benefit them. Like, oh, I struggle with long passages. I might like the English of the new SAT. So that's a thing that students do. You can't super score the ACT and the SAT together. That's sometimes some people ask that. You can't do that. And ACT is also super scored now. The ACT.org does show you a super score, which they used to not do. But it's not as accepted. It's still widely accepted. You can see an estimated 68% of schools super score the ACT. The reason that that's not as accepted is that with 4 sections to super score 4 together, you could take 4 separate ACTs and super score 4 separate sections together, and that opens it up to manipulation. So someone like myself can work with a student, and I don't want to use the word manipulate, right? Because that's probably like a negative word to use, but like kind of, we'll call it game the system, right? To optimize a student's score to the maximum degree by working on their weaknesses at the right time and understanding their score progression, and just taking a look at all of that and guiding the student in the right direction to take the test a few more times and get a crazy score that they couldn't have otherwise received on one administration of the ACT. So with only 2 sections, it's a little bit harder to do. And also just the way the score is done between the 2 tests, the ACT is opened up to a little bit more gamesmanship by people like myself, which I, obviously helping people do because it's allowed and there's nothing wrong with it. But at the same time, that's why some schools, like for example, like, some of the top schools, or like a Georgetown or something like that, they want to see all your scores. They can see how you progressed and what went on. So we do have a question that came in. Hi, are points deducted for wrong answer? Is it better to guess? Because my great question. On both the SAT and the ACT, there is no penalty for a wrong answer. So if you were going to say leave a question blank, you should just fill in a letter, right? You can just pick the letter of the day, but you should not leave anything blank. If there's 4 answer choices, you have a 1 out of 4 chance of getting it right, but just picking a random letter. Obviously, if you can use some elimination strategy and say, okay, well, I know that these 2 are wrong, but I really don't know, between the other 2, which one is correct. Then you have maybe a 50-50, right? So you definitely don't want to leave anything blank. Back in the day, more than 8 years ago, so not the paper SAT, but the one before that, the paper SAT before that one, there was a 0.25 point deduction off your raw score for wrong answers. People hated that. I mean, that was a huge source of pain for students because, just the anxiety that it gives you, like, okay, if I put this question incorrectly, I'm going to actually get a worse score than if I just left it out. That just causes a level of decision making on behalf of the student that is very complex, that we had to teach students. That I remember going through this with students. If you're able to eliminate one answer choice, then use, as is certainly wrong, then you're going to guess from the other 3, then you have a 33% chance of getting the question right. So your estimated value, right, for that guess is 0.33 points, which is higher than negative 0.25. Like if you balance it out, then you should guess, right? So it was just this crazy analysis. Imagine trying to tell students to do this. It was just ridiculous. So it's very good that they removed that, so students don't have to worry about it. I don't know the answer to the question, or I don't have time to do it, I just put something down. So that was a great question. And then another common question, and I think a common thing I hear or I get later in the process, like, so say a student has been preparing and they're not entirely satisfied with their results. I've taken the SAT and the ACT a few times. I'm not doing well. You want to gear yourself towards one of the 2 tests. That is 100% the better approach. It gives you more time to get acclimated to it. You can become more of an expert. It's less confusing. The time structure is different. The test is different. It's just a lot. I mean, do we really want students taking 4, 5, 6 standardized tests? I mean, to super score the 2 tests, you got to take each twice, right? So then you're looking at a minimum of 4 tests, which is that's just a lot, and I don't like seeing students do that. It's not beneficial to their end result. What you also don't want to do, and if you did it, it's fine, right? So don't worry about it. If you did do this, you do not want to send the student in to just take the real SAT or ACT like cold turkey without preparing to see what they get, right? Because that's now on their academic record. And if colleges want to see all the scores, it's not good. Also, if the student doesn't do well, it really sets them off on a path of feeling very negatively about the tests. So it's much better to do it in a private setting where it's only shared between curve breakers, myself, and the family, the student, and to just kind of hash that out privately, so that it doesn't count. We haven't done anything negative to the student's academic record, and we got the same feedback, if not actually significantly more feedback from our diagnostic report. And that's a much better way to do it. If you don't do well, okay, no big deal. Like that's why we're here. We're here to prepare. We're here to do better. That's what I'm here to help you to do. That's what we're trying to do here. So it starts things off in a much better tone. So I've seen that many times, like student taking the test a few times, not doing well, and then coming to us obviously for help. And then we're at this point where like the student is frustrated and upset, so we don't want to get to that point. All right, so final thoughts. What should we do, right? I think any student that took the PSAT that wasn't happy with their score or just wants to explore other options should try the ACT. I would do that now, and just determine what exam is better for you. Start doing research, right? Look at schools that you're interested in, even if you don't know exactly which ones, just the caliber or just some that you might be interested in, to see what scores you need so that we can start developing a plan. If anyone wants help with that kind of plan, that's exactly what I do, is I help guide people in the right direction in terms of what they should be doing. So I'm happy to discuss that with anybody. And then plan out the process, right? Like another piece of feedback I can provide is like, okay, Nick, I have a 1200, I want to get to 1400. How long is that going to take? Of course, I can't say that exactly, but I can give a gauge based on my prior experience with hundreds and hundreds of students, if not thousands, probably at this point, to tell you, okay, this is what we need to do to get from point A to point B. That's hugely important in setting the students' expectations and families' expectations, and giving the students an idea of how much prep they need to do, so on and so forth. Setting up the test dates, registering. I mean, we help people really kind of plan that all out, and that's hugely, hugely important. That we have a plan. We don't want to just go into this, just without kind of organizing ourselves beforehand, because then it usually gets a little hairy, right? So that would be extremely important. I do, this ridiculous picture of me, but I do post long form videos on YouTube now about these topics, about the SAT. I've actually answered every single SAT question with explanation on YouTube for the first digital practice test. So any students looking to prepare, it's free. You're more than welcome to check it out. I'm also doing educational content on the test. So, how to prepare, strategies, so on and so forth. Anyone interested in that, check out my YouTube page. I'm just trying to provide free stuff that's just, obviously, and good segue into the next slide. There's obviously paid services that we do. We have a huge, our biggest sale that we ever do every year is for Black Friday. Unfortunately, it does end this month. So anyone interested in kind of engaging in that, feel free to scan this QR code. If you just contact us to book a meeting with me, then you can lock in the sale. Even if we have a meeting in December, we'll still honor it. But just because of the fact that a lot of this stuff is very expensive, I try to provide as much free information to people as possible. That's why I do these webinars. That's why I do YouTube. Just make sure that people can get the right information. And in terms of what we do, we have private tutoring for SAT, ACT, private tutoring for AP exams, private tutoring for Regents, private tutoring for regular school subjects. And we also provide the practice testing, right? So if you do want to see how you do, or just understand that, more than welcome to just, take a free practice test. They also are free, just so you know the practice tests. We want people to be able to see where they're at, see how they're doing, and help them formulate a plan. That all is free. If you want to sign up for the services, great. If you don't, not a problem. So once again, that's a lot of what we do. And then we do also have group classes. So, another amazing service, and we have a ton of them for the first digital SAT. I do expect all of them to sell out. Last year, they all sold out, and we already have a lot of enrollments for these. We're also doing classes at like 40 schools. So depending on what school you go to, there may be classes at your school, which are usually discounted or free, which is amazing. If your school doesn't have curve breakers, I'm always happy to speak with whoever to get that in place, because we are, like I said, working with like 40 schools now, which is incredible. We love doing it, and it's a huge source of pride for me, helping students and guiding a large number of students in the right direction. For local people, where our office in Garden City, we're having these 3 currently scheduled SAT classes. We're probably going to add more, but they will fill up. And if you're interested in that, you can, once again, scan the QR code and go to that webpage and sign up right now. And if there's any questions about any of this, of course, feel free to email me privately, shoot us a contact form on our website, and I'm happy to kind of walk you guys through the process of what I would recommend. A lot of people ask, should I do a class? Should I do tutoring? What should I do? That's information that I can provide based on the student's PSAT score, feedback, discussions, so on and so forth. And then also our book will be available, hopefully, seemingly by December 1st. That's in a few days. I'm working on it. It's all the content is done. We just need the cover to be finished. But that's gonna be amazing, because that is gonna be in like the $20-something range. So say you didn't want to spend on all this stuff, you could still do that, and it will actually be a great way to prepare for the test. It's basically walk you through the entire exam. And that's going to be required for all the classes, but also you can buy that on Amazon once it does finally release, which should be, I would say, within the next week. So that's another option for you guys. And that's pretty much it. Any final questions that you guys had on the digital SAT, on the PSAT? Feel free to throw in the Q&A. I'm going to make sure to answer those, and make sure to help you guys out with it. So I'll just give you guys a second if anyone does have a final few questions that I can answer. The last thing I'll say, just while anyone is typing a question, is that, people always ask me, what are the hallmarks of successful preparation for the SAT or the ACT? Like, just generally speaking, like what separates the students from the students who improve a ton from the students that struggle to improve? And we've analyzed this data. So like we're doing these practice tests. We have over 10,000 practice tests done by students. We analyzed it. We analyzed all of our customers, how many hours of tutoring they did, how many classes they did, how many tests they took, how long they studied for, so on and so forth. And the two main contributing factors to improving on the SAT or ACT is obviously the time the student spent studying. Obviously, whether that's with a tutor or a class or on their own, doesn't really matter. I mean, obviously you might get better results doing tutoring or a class or whatnot, but the student puts the time in, they're going to get the score out as long as they're doing that effectively, right? They don't want to just grind themselves into the ground doing a million questions and not analyzing them. But the students that can really do that are going to be the ones that are going to improve more than the students that do very little in terms of preparing for the test. Number two is the number of practice tests. So we found statistically a direct correlation between the number of practice tests that a student took and their end result score, right? So the students that sit for more practice tests get more of a score improvement. I mean, that's also like, these things are kind of obvious, right? But what students really want to sit down on Saturday morning and do a full SAT or full ACT? Obviously, that's something that not everyone wants to do, but that's why we provide that as a service. It's free for the ACT and with tutoring, and it's low cost for the SAT because we want students to do it, right? So when students do take a number of practice tests, they acclimate themselves to the test, they learn how to approach it, and they do significantly better. So for anyone wondering, okay, on my own, how do I prepare for this test? You have to put in time on questions, you have to do practice tests, right? So those are the two main factors. If I guess there's no final questions, anyone have a question, I'm happy to answer. If anyone has a personal question, like about my personal student that they don't want to kind of ask in this forum, more than happy to discuss that. Feel free to give the office a call. You can email me, you can fill out a contact form on our website. But once again, thank you guys for joining on tonight. I'll stay on for another minute or two if anyone does have a question, but I appreciate all of your time, and hopefully this was helpful in understanding the PSAT and understanding the process to prepare for the SAT from the PSAT. And I thank you guys for joining on. It was great. So once again, thank you so much and have a great night.